So while doing research, I rewatched hundreds of films and based on what came up in our interviews. And no one had ever mentioned Kiss the Spider Woman, but William Hurt's character always read to me as trans.
It's an accident. If I had the courage, I'd cut it off.
You'd still be a man. A man!
That was all I needed to hear to confirm my suspicions, and it was a really painful moment to witness, but it makes you really wonder if a trans audience was ever considered.
When you are a member of a marginalized community, most of the film and television is not made with you in mind. And so if you are a person of color, an LGBTQ person, a person who's an immigrant, a person with a disability, you develop a critical awareness because you understand that the images that you're seeing are not your life.
Forgive me, Papa.
Wait! So this next moment is the first story that Laverne shared with me during our first meeting in June 2017, right? The film Yentl came up and I told her that I wasn't going to use it in disclosure because the character is so clearly not trans. And then Laverne sat back and quietly said that she really identified with Barbra Streisand's character as Yentl. And I joked with her saying that it must be because of her fondness for Jewish men, but I couldn't have been more wrong.
I giggle because it's like I'm a Black trans girl from Alabama and like I live for Yentl. I don't know if I'm the target audience for Yentl.
Welcome to our yeshiva.
I'm accepted.
I was really young when I saw it and embodied so many of my longings to be seen for who I was, but needing to fit in a traditional way to sort of get by at the time. I mean, the song, Will Someone Ever Look at Me That Way, was like my jam.
Look at how he looks at her. Will someone ever look at me that way?
The Yentl story is so indicative of Laverne's specific lens as a trans woman, right? Finding those personal stories really became the heart of the film. So it's like shaping and structuring the narrative was a puzzle, and we decided to base it on these personal memories and experiences as opposed to a structure that was chronological or thematic. So this really allowed the film to unfold as an emotional experience, inviting a personal connection with our cast, right? All of whom are transgender people. Laverne's story shows the power of Hollywood storytelling and the ways in which trans people find themselves in films that never had them in mind, right? So having this trust and access to our cast was so key in getting these moments, right? And finding these moments. And part of that trust came from having so many trans people on set. We prioritized hiring trans people. And when we couldn't do that, we mentored trans people. And our cast felt safe enough to be vulnerable and share what it was like to identify with images that were often excluding them, right? Or negating their existence. And, Yentl is not a trans character. We can all agree on that. The story is about someone pretending to be someone they're not, and that is just like Laverne had to pretend to be a boy in order to get by as a child.
I connected to that because I was a girl that no one saw as a girl at the time. And now someone has looked at me that way. And also Victor Victoria.
A woman pretending to be a man, pretending to be a woman?
Ridiculous.
It's preposterous.
In fact, it's so preposterous no one would ever believe it.
In 1982, I graduated from high school. And that was the year Yentl came out, Victor Victoria came out.
When you play me...
And I saw those movies so many times.
It's a guy.
Nick Adams has worked at GLAAD for over 20 years. He's the director of transgender representation, and I'm not sure anyone else in the world knows more about the topic than he does. And he recently admitted to me that he did not believe we'd be able to pull off making the film because it seemed like too daunting of a task.
For whatever reason, we are creatures who want to see our stories reflected back to us, starting with cave paintings to 3D IMAX. We want to see ourselves reflected back to us in a story.
Towards the end of Disclosure, Yancey Ford quotes Marianne Wright Edelman, saying children cannot be what they cannot see. And he continues to say that it's not just about children, right? It's about all of us. We can't be a better society until we see a better society. I can't be in the world until I see that I am in the world. And this idea points directly back to an earlier scene in the film where Yancey talks about seeing gender transgressive images in early film, but also has to contend with D.W. Griffith directing those films.
One of the films that is often credited with inventing what's called the dynamic montage. And that was a D.W. Griffith film.
This history has never been documented before. I spent the first 3 years focused entirely on research, curating and harnessing a mountain of archival footage of over 1,000 film and television clips, right? In order to frame all the personal anecdotes that people shared. And by juxtaposing different emotions, we're able to move the film away from a survey film and into an emotional narrative. Susan Stryker is one of the leading, if not the leading, trans historian of our time. And for disclosure, I think we spent, like 2 days on the phone, probably about 12 hours. And the story of Judith of Bethulia truly blew my mind. Like, here was a character in 1914 who, by today's definition, is trans, right? Here we finally can see ourselves in early cinema. And this is proof we've always been a site of fascination and therefore a part of society. And after that phone call with Susan, I found the film on YouTube, and it was a horrendous copy. Like, you could barely make out the images, but I didn't care. Like, I kept it in the film. I felt it was so important. It was such a vital part of this story. Thankfully, my editor did care, and eventually we found a beautiful copy to use.
It's like trans and cinema have grown up together. It's like we have always been present on screen, and it's not just coincidental. I mean, there's something really deeply connected.
It was so interesting, albeit not surprising, to see the intersection of racism and transphobia dating all the way back to early cinema.
Can we all just talk about D.W. Griffith for a minute? As the Missy Elliott song would say, we need to just back it up for a minute. The fact that we study and teach D.W. Griffith without saying a word about the representation, like, I'm glad I didn't go to film school. Because if I had seen Birth of a Nation, when they got to that blackface moment, when this guy springs up from behind a bush wanting to rape the white woman, that would have been it for me at film school, right? That would have been my last day. Not only is D.W. Griffith incredibly racist, but he understands that you can turn gender non-conforming people into the joke of your story.
It was really meaningful and exciting to learn about the twin fascinations of gender, transgression, and race, and how they played out in screen, reflecting the anxieties of the time. But it was equally necessary to acknowledge DW's racist legacy and hold historians accountable to that. And reckoning with conflicting feelings became a huge theme throughout the entire film.
It's like, oh yeah, great, D.W. Griffith, you know, racist piece of shit. You've invented the stereotype in film, well done.